Hey y'all, welcome back. Thanks for watching. Today's special is going to be the special work on this special vehicle. Now, I generally don't do smaller bikes, but you got to get what you can get when you can get it. This here is a 2004 Kawasaki KX100 two-smoker. Now, those of you who watch my channel know that it's not uncommon for me to buy bikes in a box. This one here is special. And when I say special, I mean there's no rhyme or reason to what I'm looking at here. Normally when I buy these bikes in a box, things are semi-organized, but this bike here I got for super cheap, and it's worth what I paid for it in parts anyway. But you know me, I want to try and get it going again, get it back on the track, let somebody else enjoy this bike for a little bit longer. So it is absolutely gonna need some TLC and then some. So if you're interested in seeing what kind of trouble I got myself in, stick around. Well, we've got a great big box of engine parts. Let's go through it and see what needs to be ordered. Right crankcase half appears to be in good condition. Left crankcase half, again we got sort of the same thing, good condition. The inner clutch cover, definitely going to need some seals and bearings in here as well, but the structure is in good shape. Cylinder and head, I'll have to take this apart and take a good look at it, pull the reed valve out and take a look at that. Power valve seems to work fine. Cranky and piston. All this stuff looks like it's in fairly good condition. Looks like it's just been sitting. It's got some rust on it, but the bearings are in good shape. Now, of course, somebody went ahead and beat the crankshaft out by the threads, so that's something we'll have to do some repair on. Expansion chamber, pro circuit, and literally there's only a couple of dings in it. It's not even caved in. Sweet. The airbox boot to the carburetor, stator cover, stator. Here's the drive mechanism for the power valve, the drive chain, got the clutch assembly, clutch cover, little tiny Kickstarter, shift shaft, some miscellaneous nuts and bolts. That's organization for you. Bolts, nuts, washers, transmission pieces. I'm going to assume this is where the rest of the engine is. Definitely just been sitting. Water pump cover, kickstart, return spring, shift forks. My flywheel. The other two shift forks. I'm going to have to go through this transmission real well. It might be just better off to go purchase another used transmission for this. That will come with everything. Well, I'm going to take a few minutes to assess and ponder the damage here and kind of make a decision as to what I'm going to do. But in the meantime, I'll take you for a quick walk around the bike. Back wheel is dragging just a little bit. Not too bad, but I'll have to get into that caliper a little bit. The crankshaft itself seems to be in really good condition. These threads are butchered up, and what this is from is obviously somebody using a hammer to bang this crankshaft out of the bearings. So what I need to do is take off the end of these threads, preserving as much as I can. Now that we got that cut off, I put a little bevel on the end. What I'm going to use is a thread file, 1.25, just to clean this up before we get the die on it. It's a 10 by 1.25. What this tool does, it will restore your threads on a set of threads that you can't get a die on. There's our crankshaft nut back on. So we can reuse this crank, which is great news. I'm wondering why somebody pulled this apart. None of this stuff is too terribly bad. Gonna need an intake boot for sure. Let's get these reeds out. Where you going, buddy? Well, carbon reeds look to be in good shape. Well, let me get this over in the parts washer and give it a good clean. See what we come up with. Now I got to take some measurements on our cylinder and piston. The cylinder's not too bad. It has some light scoring, which would probably survive another round. The piston definitely has some light scoring on it. But I got to keep in mind that these bikes here are not worth a whole hell of a lot of money, and I got to try to save what I can save. Definitely going to get a set of rings. Unless these are out of spec, we're going to try and reuse them. So 52.29 millimeters or 2.06 inches is going to be our service limit on our piston. So I've got 2.063 almost, so the piston's still in spec. And 2.07 on our cylinder is going to be our service limit. So we've got 2.064. So this cylinder is still within spec. Just for a goof, I'm going to throw these rings. They're in a rough shape. I can see it already. The gap is pretty wide, so they definitely have had some some use, they would probably work again, but I'm going to get a set of rings and not cheap out on that anyway. So this is where I'm at. Got to order a set of rings. Need a whole engine gasket kit and seal kit. Need my intake. I need a clutch for sure. Water pump, impeller, and rebuild kit. One of the bearings is seized up pretty bad. The stator has a broken connection on it, which could have been why this was taken apart. And I'm going to get a used transmission. There is a gear that's got a broken tooth, and there's a couple washers and spacers in here that are missing. All this stuff's pretty rusty. I'd rather just get a used transmission. I think it's going to be more cost effective for me. So that's what we got to do. Let me get some parts ordered. Well, I got a whole bunch of parts for our KX project. Not just replacement parts, but parts that were missing off the bike anyway. So we got a new air filter cage and air filter, seal kit for the engine. The intake had some cracking on it, so I went ahead and got a new one of those. The ignition coil was missing on the bike, so I got one of those. I'm going to throw a new set of levers on it. Of course, the clutch was burned up, so we're going to replace that. I got a new set of piston rings. We'll get those fitted in the cylinder and measured up here in just a little bit. One of the bearings in the crankcase that was frozen, we're going to replace that. I got a water pump rebuild kit. I got a complete engine gasket kit, top and bottom. A bag of miscellaneous washers, nuts, bolts. I got a used transmission, and also our stator being broken. I went ahead and ordered a set of coils for that, and we're going to solder that in. So before we go any further, the next thing I want to do is get these friction discs soaking in some engine oil, get them prepared for installation. So to get this seal out so we can replace it, we have to knock the entire main bearing out. And I'll use a socket for that. In this particular case, it's a 1-inch. A lot of junk piled up in there. Let me get that cleaned out. A lot of times to install these bearings, what we want to do is put the bearing in the freezer. That will cool it down and shrink it, and then we heat the case just a little bit, and the heat will make the case expand, and these will slide together a lot easier. I'm going to go ahead and just drive them in. A couple more seals on the clutch housing. These seal drivers just do a really good job of making sure that the seals go in straight and flush. There's a metal ring on the outside of these seals. Even if they're covered in rubber and it doesn't look like there's metal, there is. And if you distort these, you can distort the seals and you'll end up getting a leak. While I'm in here, I'm going to do what I need to do for the water pump. And this kit consists of a gasket, a very important sticker. Also give you your seal and a new bearing. Now this Tusk kit came with a water pump seal as well. I'll save it. I'm not sure I'm going to do too many more of these bikes, but I'll save it nonetheless. So now what I have to do is, since the seal is pushed in from the outside and the bearing is pushed in from the inside, I want to get a screwdriver that's large enough to go inside this inner race of this bearing. Since I don't care about the seal replacing it, I don't care if I damage it. That's going to go straight through and push on that, and we're going to tap this bearing out. So there you go. Now what we can do is tap our seal out from the other side. Now we go to tap the seal back in. There's two sides to the seal. There's a flat side, and there's a side that has a little bit of a lip sticking up. This lip sticking up is going to go towards the outside of the motor. So when we tap this in, we're going to tap it in this direction. Next thing we're going to do is get this bottom end together. Let's get our transmission bag opened up and go through all this. Now when it comes to motorcycle transmissions, the thing you want to look at right away is make sure all of these free spinning gears spin freely and they're not binding up. And secondly, we want to look at the dogs on the gears. So this is what engages with the other gear. What you'll notice is these ends where the clutch dogs spline into will start to round over, and the dogs themselves will have wear on them. And in which case, if they get worn too badly, they will continually pop out of gear, or maybe not even mesh in gear whatsoever. So those are the things you want to look at. This one looks like it's in pretty good shape. It's got a little bit of wear on the dogs, nothing I'm really going to worry about. So you can see as that slides in, the shift fork pushes that in, it locks that gear together. When you do that a number of times in the right orientation, it will put the bike in the gear that you're supposed to be in. So this stack looks great. Dogs all look good here. So everything looks in good shape. Also, these forks can bend if you do too much stomping on your shift pedal, shift lever, and this can cause misalignment of the gears and feel like it's locked up or just not engaging properly. And these look like they're in good shape. Also, you want to check your shift drum real well. Make sure that none of the grooves on the drum itself have any damage or chipped out pieces. And where your shift forks go in, you want to make sure that there's no damage on those as well. So this all looks pretty good. We can start putting this transmission back in. All right, I'm going to finish installing this crankshaft. Basically, I threw my crankshaft in my freezer to get it cold. Like I said, the cold will make it shrink, and a lot of times I'll heat the inner race of the bearing, but with the seal on the other side of this, I got to really be careful. Hopefully she'll just slide in. There we go. Now I'm going to get our RTV on our cases. I'm going to put it pretty heavy because somebody gouged the heck out of these things. I like Ultra Black or Ultra Gray by Permatex. The way I do this, I use a hard rubber roller. And you can put an even coat. On these two strokes, it's definitely very critical to make sure that the seal around the crankcase is good, since part of the air fuel mixture will be mixing in down here in the crankcase. It has to be separated from the outside world and also has to be separated from the transmission. So a good heavy coat of this RTV is going to be necessary. Now, I generally prefer working on 4-cycle dirt bike engines, but when it comes to the crankcases, there's nothing easier than a 2-stroke. There's basically a transmission and a crankshaft. There's no oil pumps or pump feeds or anything that goes in here. It's very, very simple. So we're going to have to use a puller to pull this crankshaft through this bearing. It is slightly a pressed fit. Usually cooling it helps. In this particular case, it's warmed up enough where the press fit is back again. So we're going to use this tool that will help us pull this crankshaft through. So this nut here will grab onto the crankshaft. This part here has a bearing on the end of it, and this will sit against the crankcase. When we tighten this nut, it will pull this shaft up, essentially pulling on the crankshaft and pushing down on the case. This is the safest way to do this without doing any damage to the case or the crankshaft. And as we do it, we're going to tap the rest of the case to make sure everything is splining in the way it should. So the issue I have is my dowel pin's dragging a little bit going in. So I put my crankcase bolts in, it will pull this tight. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at this top end. First thing I want to do is we're going to drop these rings in the cylinder, and I want to go ahead and get a ring end gap measurement to make sure it's not going to bind or anything of that sort. As you put that in, we'll square that up with the piston. So what we're looking to do is get a measurement on that ring end gap to make sure that's within spec. If it's too loose, you're obviously going to have a compression bypass. If it's too tight, when these rings get hot, they can actually jam up, bind, and then cause damage to your cylinder or piston. So what we're looking for is a 0.3 to 0.5 millimeter. I'm not going to worry about the top end so much. I'm going to just worry about the tightness of the gap. So this is my 0.3 millimeter. We're going to go ahead and put this in here and see if our gap is too tight. And the gap on this ring is too tight. We're going to have to file these end gaps. We'll check both of them. Yeah, they're definitely too tight. This would not be good if we try to run this engine. Let me see where we're at and how much we have to take off. So they are at 0.20. So I got to take 1/10 of a millimeter off. These are aftermarket rings, and that's why we're having this issue. But it's an easy fix. What we need to do is get our rings. These end gaps need to be filed. So what we'll do is set them in the vise, and we'll do a little at a time and remeasure them until we're in spec. You want to use just a nice flat fine file. I'm going to go a little bit at a time. We don't want to take too much, and then we're in the opposite direction here. And there we are. So it's just dragging through at 0.30. Now we just have to do the other one. Next thing I want to do is we're going to do a light ball hone on this cylinder to scratch up our Nikasil coating and prepare the cylinder for a new set of rings. What we use for this process is what they call ball hone, dingle ball hone, and this is a 320 grit. And what we want to do is lubricate the cylinder with oil. We're not going to be shy with that, and we're going to run this thing back and forth while we're spinning it to get a 45 to 60 degree crosshatch pattern back on our Nikasil coating. This is just to refresh the surface. This will not fix any imperfections. It will not resize your cylinder. Well, let me take that back. If you do it long enough, it will resize your cylinder, but it'll also take the Nikasil coating off, and then you're going to be replacing your cylinder or sending it out to have it re-plated. So we just want to go nice and easy with this. If you can see, it's restored that crosshatch pattern, and now she's ready for some new rings. I'm going to take this over to the parts washer and give it another good scrub. Get any grit or anything out of here, and then we'll start putting our power valve assembly back together. Alright, clean up our power valve, got all the carbon off of it. I'm going to hit this with a little bit of 2-cycle oil. So she slides nice and easy. What I'm going to do now is get my rings on my piston. When you look at your rings, there'll always be a mark of some sort. This one has an N. It also says top. They are directional in most cases. Now, unlike a 4-stroke engine where the ring gaps have to be set properly according to the manufacturer's recommendations, 2 cycles will actually have a pin, usually have a pin that will hold the ring in place, because the rings cannot turn in a 2-cycle engine, because if the gaps ever turn, they could potentially get stuck on these transfer ports and break the rings or damage the cylinder or piston. I left one of the retaining rings in. This way I could slide the pin partially in, and I don't have to deal with trying to get 2 snap rings in while I'm trying to put this together on the engine. Now, something I like to do is I like to get the piston in the cylinder started prior to putting it on the engine. I just find that it's a lot easier to line the connecting rod up with the piston pin or the wrist pin than it is to try to get all the rings squished down and the cylinder on it while the connecting rod is moving and the crankshaft's moving up and down. So that's the way I like to do it. Now, first thing I want to do is look at the top of the piston. There's an arrow. This arrow is going to point towards the exhaust side. There'll be some kind of a mark, usually on the piston, and it will always point towards the exhaust side. At this point here, we can just go ahead and drop our piston and cylinder down on our connecting rod and push the pin through. I just got to put my circlip in, and to do that we're going to cover the crankcase in case it falls. It doesn't fall down inside of the engine. Make sure that clip snaps in the groove in there so it doesn't fall out. If it falls out, definitely potential for damage. Much easier. Now we'll go ahead and turn this, make sure we don't have any drag. So just to give you an example on these 2 strokes here, my drill maxes out at 1500 RPM. That's just a touch over idle for these things. These things spin up to 10, 12,000 RPM, like 10 times faster than this is going. So you can see the forces that are involved inside of these engines. Now, in tightening our cylinder head bolts, Kawasaki wants us to be at 18 foot-pounds. I'm going to do them in 2 steps. I just like to do them that way. I'm going to do them at 10, then 18, and I'm also going to do them in a star pattern to try and eliminate any warp. I'm going to get started trying to replace the stator coil. They call this here a source coil. And for some reason it broke off here. So we need to unsolder these terminals and solder them onto this new coil. So there's our wires soldered in. We've got a black with red and a black with white. What I'm going to do is test at my connector here to make sure I have the right ohms for this coil. So what we're going to do is set our resistance to R times 100. I'm going to zero that out. And again, we're going to go against black with red and black with white. What we're looking for is somewhere between 288 and 432 ohms. This coil ohmed out properly before I soldered it in. So let's just make sure our wiring is good. Red and to white. And we have 330 ohms. So that falls right between where we need to be. And this stator is now fixed and can go back in the engine. So the ignition timing on these is adjustable. What I'm going to do is just set it right back to where it was originally from the factory, which is pretty much right in the center. Make sure you don't forget your key, Woodruff. If you don't put this in, your timing will definitely be off. Since my thread here is shortened just a little bit because we had to do this repair, I'm going to put a little bit of blue Loctite on it. Unfortunately, there's a couple little small parts that I didn't notice were missing when I placed my order, which kind of sucks. Now I got to order some more stuff, but it's okay. So there's a little spring that goes on this shifter mechanism that's missing. There's a snap ring that goes on the outside of this gear that's missing. So I got to order a couple more things. Well, I guess since I have to wait for some parts, let's do some other things to this while we have a chance. I got a new rear tire I want to put on. I'm also thinking I might want to touch up this frame a little bit. Listen, I know, you ain't gonna tell me. This bike ain't worth all that. But it was mostly all the parts, so I figured I'd just pull the rest of the stuff off and give her a quick and make it look a little bit better. Waiting for parts anyway. What I'm using here is called OSPHO, O-S-P-H-O. It is a rust converter. It will turn this rust black and neutralize it. Alright, let's let this stuff do its thing. Next stop, home improvement store, so we can get a Craigslist rebuild in a can. Man, this thing is silver. I know I bought silver paint, but I wasn't expecting it to be this silver. These frames are a little bit on the gray side rather than silver, but I don't really feel like repainting it. So we're gonna have a shiny, shiny silver, almost chrome-like frame. Unfortunately, I got my parts, my snap ring, my spring, a couple other little things that I had ordered, and we can go ahead and finish putting this bottom end back together. Now, there were a lot of washers and stuff missing. Everything was kind of just thrown into a bag, and sometimes it's a little bit difficult if you guys are trying to put this back together. What trick works for me that works pretty good, I mean, I have service manuals and things along those lines, but sometimes it's just faster to go to the parts website, and they usually have fiches broke down or exploded part diagrams. I use mostly for my parts Rocky Mountain ATV. You can go to partsfish.com or partzilla.com and basically print yourself out like an exploded view of the parts. So I got a couple of big washers that I ordered that were missing, and this will show the direction in which they go, and it will help you out a lot. I rebuild a lot of bike engines, but I don't rebuild KX100 bottom ends all day long, so I don't always know where all this stuff goes. So this definitely helps when you're kind of lost for where parts go or what might be missing. So that gear has to go in first before you put the clutch assembly. Alright, we did it right now. Got all this back together. Got our water pump drive gear in. Now before I install the side cover, I've got to get my KIPS actuator valve in and timed. The way we do that is you'll put your actuator in the upper bearing. And we're going to slide this shaft on. What we're looking for is this mark on the shaft should line up with this mark here. You're going to slide it straight down. Now install your retainer screw. Torque that to spec and put your boot back on. Now, once your boot's on, you can slide your side cover on. You may have to turn the engine a little bit so those gears mesh. So this little hook mechanism right here will grab this and pull up on it, essentially separating your clutch plates and disengaging your clutch. Now before I go any further, I'm going to go ahead and fill this thing with oil. Make sure I don't have any leaks before I put it all back together in the frame. Those crankcases were pretty bad. Get our reed cage installed. Our new carburetor boot. Everything feels nice and free. Let's put it back in the frame. So much lighter than what I'm used to. Now my airbox boot was really dirty, cleaned it up, and this thing is hard as a rock, and it's supposed to be soft rubber. So little tip, technically on an intake manifold or something like this, you should replace it. But if you're in a pinch or on a budget, you can just throw these in a pot of boiling water for a few minutes, or hit them with the old heat gun. Once you get them warmed up, they become nice and soft and pliable again. Temporarily, they'll harden back up again, but they'll stay soft long enough for you to install them. Well, here she is, all put back together. Thing's got tons of compression. Obviously, we checked the spark, got good crisp spark. Did a few other things while we were at it here. Put a new rear tire on it, some levers. She's oiled up, she got coolant in it. We're gonna go ahead and get some non-ethanol fuel mixed with a premium synthetic 2-cycle oil, mixed exactly at 32:1. Now let me let you guys know something here. These 2-cycle engines are practically bulletproof, with a caveat. Just like anything else, you got to do your maintenance, you know what I mean? Clean your air filter, change your transmission oil in these things. But what's critical about these things is using the proper amount of good quality 2-cycle engine oil. What ends up happening with these things a lot of times is they smoke. You see a lot of smoke coming out for a 2-cycle engine. And people think, oh, I got too much oil in it. So they back the oil off to 40:1, 50:1, whatever it is. Well, oil is the only thing that keeps the crankshaft and piston, cylinder, and all that stuff lubricated in these. If you don't have enough oil, they're eventually going to seize up on you. Now, the manufacturers have put a lot of time and effort and energy and research and development into determining the proper amount of oil mixture for the gasoline. And that's 32:1. 32 parts of gasoline to 1 part of oil. Easy way to do it, very cheap, ratio right, cup per gallon. It'll show you exactly how much oil at whatever ratio you're looking for. Now, if you find yourself in that situation where your 2-stroke engine is smoking badly, it's not your oil amount, it's your jetting. Your jetting is off on the carburetor. You're too rich. Now, this video is not going to get into all that stuff as far as jetting these carburetors properly. But for now, we'll go ahead and gas her up, see if we can get this thing started. Now, obviously, when it first starts, it's going to smoke. I've used a lot of oil to build this engine, so. All right, let's turn the gas on, see if we got any leaks. Looks good. You know what? So tiny. here she is all put back together. She runs real good. It's so difficult for me not to want to get into doing more on this, like replacing all the plastics and all that stuff, but it's just not in the budget for a bike like this. There was a lot of time and effort put into it to get it back together again, as neglected as it was, but I'm glad I did. Hopefully another kid can have some fun on this thing, or somebody can learn on it. Let me just thank all of you for watching, subscribing to my channel, giving me the thumbs up. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for all your kind words. It really means a lot to me. This was a fun little project, and I'm looking forward to the next one. I hope you are too. Thanks again for watching.
Mm-hmm.